Today we are going to be talking about crypto assets in divorce and separation. So we're going to spend some time going through what crypto assets actually are, the jargon, the terminology, some background on how this all came to be in existence. And then we're going to go into a more detailed discussion about how that applies to family law. So that is probably going to fall on the other side of the break that we're going to have shortly. So just a little bit about me. So I have seemingly inherited the tagline of the crypto divorce lawyer from the crypto community, which is helpful. So I started experimenting with mining Bitcoin and working with blockchain in 2011. And when the big spike in the value of crypto happened in 2017, it started to become a lot more mainstream. So clients did start coming in saying that they either had crypto or they thought that their spouse had it. And so I decided that this was obviously two worlds that were going to unintentionally collide. What then happened is I realized there wasn't anybody else in the family law community that also understood how these assets worked. So I started networking in the crypto space, as they like to call it, to try and make connections with potential clients, but also experts who would be able to help me with those sorts of cases. We all have our little black book of networking through accountants, forensic accountancy, company valuations, estate agents, all of those sorts of things. But the reality is that when it comes to crypto, there wasn't really anything for me to help with the advice that I was giving to clients. And that's particularly difficult if you're also having to advise them on the best way to manage the assets. So normally you're getting help from experts on how to value those assets and how to assess whether they're worthwhile, and those experts just didn't really exist. So that's something that I've been doing to try and build up that network of people that I know. And over the last 5 years, I've been giving presentations to all sorts of different people. So I've gone to One Hair Court to talk to the barristers there about crypto. I discussed it at the Family Law Day for Surrey Resolution. I've done multiple podcasts about it, normally in the crypto community rather than the legal community. And also I regularly do talks for MBL seminars. So a variation of this talk is on there at the moment, and there's also a second talk which is an in-depth exploration into crypto, which is a lot more detailed, but there's a degree of expectation that you already understand some element of crypto when doing that talk as well. And hopefully we're going to be building on that with looking at drafting tips as a course alongside a few other bits and pieces. So that's sort of my involvement with crypto. So I've been around it for the last 11 years, and I've been working with it as an asset within family proceedings for the last sort of 5-6 years. Now, what I'm going to show you next is a video from the BBC website. It's a really good video to give you an understanding of what blockchain is and how that interacts with Bitcoin. It should play and be audible to everybody, but if anybody has any problems with the video, then I can always send you a link to it after today. And everyone will be receiving this slide deck after today, and the video is embedded into that deck as well anyway. Okay, so we're just going to have a little play of that now.
When you want to buy something normally, using your normal bank card, this is what happens. I give my card details to the shop asks the bank if I'm good for the money. The bank checks its records to see if I've got enough in my account. If I do, it lets the shop know. It updates its records to show the movement of money from my account to the shop's. It takes a little cut for its trouble. Now, if you wanted to remove the bank from that system, who else would you trust to keep those records and not alter them or cheat in any way? Well, I wouldn't trust you. I wouldn't trust you. In fact, I wouldn't trust any single person, but I might trust everyone. The idea is you don't have a central record of transactions. Instead, you distribute many, many copies of this ledger around the world. Each owner of each copy records every transaction. So, to buy something using cryptocurrency, I give the shop my details. The shop asks all the bookkeepers if I'm good for the money. The bookkeepers all check their records to see if I have enough. If I do, they tell the shop, and then all update their records to show the movement of money. So there's no way that a forged transaction can make it in. If I try to alter a ledger, it won't match all of the other copies, and it gets rejected. Oh, and one of them, at random, will be given a reward of some newly created cryptocurrency. This is how cryptocurrencies work. And remember, all of these bookkeepers, all of these ledgers, they're not actually people, they're computers. Lots of computers.
Okay, so that is a very quick sort of explanation of how a blockchain works. So we're going to go into a little bit further detail of that shortly. And I appreciate that pretty much, I think everybody that's on this conference wants to learn about how crypto interacts with your family law practice, but it's important for you to also understand to some degree the technology that lies behind the asset that you're working with, because it helps you understand how you can work with that asset. So if you have any questions as we're going through this, then please feel free to ask them, but we will have a Q&A session at the end to go through this. So briefly then, we'll just have a quick look at the history of Bitcoin to help you have an understanding of how long this has been around and therefore how many different people are interacting with this as an asset. So after the financial crash of 2008, a lot of people became concerned with the realization that a centralized control of assets can have an effect on the value of your assets, whether you're doing anything with them or not. So a lot of people became very concerned with that as a concept. So there was an idea created of a decentralized currency, an ability to hold wealth in a way that was not controlled by a bank or a government or any other centralized system. And it was very much an independent concept. So what you saw in the video that we've just watched is the idea of it being decentralized because everybody who's involved is checking whether or not you're doing the right thing. And the blockchain itself, the Bitcoin blockchain, for example, is an uneditable blockchain. So every transaction that has happened with those Bitcoins is recorded on that blockchain, on that ledger. So there isn't an ability to fraudulently create Bitcoin or to fraudulently say that you've got it and that you can sell it. It either exists or it doesn't. It's a very black and white concept. So people become very concerned about this risk of fraud and people hiding assets within different cryptographic currencies. But the reality is that a blockchain is a public ledger. It's a public record of all of those coins. So even though you may not necessarily have as much control over those coins as you would like to, you can see where they're going and what's happening to them. And we're going to explore that in more detail shortly. So going back to 2008, there is an individual or potentially a group of individuals called Satoshi Nakamoto. So We don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. There are theories of who that person is. You may have read in the news about a gentleman called Craig Wright. So he has been trying to establish himself as one of the founders of Bitcoin. And he says that between him and a few other people, he created the Bitcoin blockchain. And what he's doing now is he's going around and suing anybody that's trying to use the Bitcoin, what they call the white paper, which is the original concept written up of what Bitcoin blockchain would actually look like. A lot of the crypto community does not believe that he is the founder of Bitcoin, and they do not take his claims seriously, because the way that he is behaving and the way he is interacting with society directly contradicts the reason that this was created in the first place. So his behavior and his desire to control and to gain wealth from Bitcoin seemingly coincided with it suddenly becoming worth a lot of money, and it directly contradicts the reasons why this was created in the first place. So you may see him pop up every now and then, but it's not necessarily somebody that we take too seriously. So you're then looking at the history of how Bitcoin has come to where we find it now. So you had an initial rush in 2011 where it went up to £1,000 a coin. So prior to that, it was worth significantly less, and you're looking at sort of 50 pence, if that, per coin. So that was a big rush within the miner crypto community at the time. You then had your second big rush in 2017, and it went up to £20,000 a coin. And that was the first time it went to such a degree of value that people started to sit up and pay attention. So around that time is when you started to get more material in the press. And that was around the time I started to get clients coming through the door who had it or thought their other half had it. And it became much more mainstream at that point. So what you may find is where you have clients that have these assets, it won't be unusual for them to be people who may have started investing around 2017, 2018. So if you're then thinking about how you're going to research whether people have those assets, that's the sort of time frame that you need to be thinking of if your client is concerned that their spouse has this asset but they're hiding it. So that's the sort of time frame that you need to bear in mind. We then had the third big rush again, which was last year, and that went up to £47,000 a coin. We're now currently at about 24,500. The market is on a downward turn at the moment, but overall, from the point of conception, we're very much on an upward trajectory. So there are a lot of news articles in the press at the moment about how this is Bitcoin dying and crypto is over and nobody's ever going to work with it. But the reality is there are so many big companies that are invested in crypto and blockchain technology right now that it's not going to do that. It's not going to crash and fail. It's having the dip like it always does. And the value does fluctuate and the value does move. And that is something that is inevitable. It is going to be something that you have to address as part of your disclosure and be conscious about the fact that the values do fluctuate. But there is a sort of a belief amongst the community that it's not going to completely diminish in value. So the reason why you shouldn't ignore this as an asset within your family proceedings is because it could become significantly high in value in the future. So you have to ensure that your client understands that if they're not going to be receiving this share of this asset, whether it's through offsetting or something else, they have to be aware that there's a possibility that they're taking a risk at losing out on wealth in the future. And as long as they know that risk, it's their decision whether they take that risk or not. But we have to make sure that we make them aware of those sorts of things. So the next slide is to look at what is blockchain. So blockchain, if you imagine, I try to use the analogy of a train. So the blockchain is the train and each carriage is a block. So when you are trying to use the Bitcoin blockchain, you have to send Bitcoin to somebody over the blockchain. So what you're doing is you're putting your Bitcoin into a block, into a carriage, and it's moving along to the person that you've told it to go to. And when we watched that video earlier, and they were talking about all the different ledgers, all the checks and balances, those are people mining through their computer to make the blockchain check and move that Bitcoin on. And they get rewarded for using that mining power to make that train work. And that's how people are incentivized to make the blockchain work, because they get rewarded in those tokens, which we're going to sort of explore in a little bit more detail in a second. So there is a degree of fear and concern around blockchain technology and around crypto assets because they are relatively new. If we think about all the other currencies and financial assets we have in our community, they've been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And we are looking at something that's been around for just shy of a decade. So there is still a significant amount of resistance within the financial community towards this as an asset. That's not stopping the clients from investing in it. So even though there are people dismissive of it, you still need to know what it is and how you're going to work with it and how you're going to advise on it. So what we're probably going to see start happening is blockchain is starting to become something that industry is using within the company, within the firm. So for example, you could have a conveyancing transaction from start to finish on a localized blockchain, and every stage of that transaction would be on a blockchain based technology, so that there is a permanent record of all of the documents that have been addressed within those proceedings. And things like insurance companies, every insurance claim would be recorded from start to finish on their blockchain, so that you would have that record. And arguably, if you were looking at something like a consent order, if the clients are working through somewhat of a mediation model where they're working together and they're exchanging financial disclosure, there's nothing stopping that from being on a blockchain based structure. Now, that's probably quite a long way off from where we are now, but it's just illustrative of how this is something that is going to be integral to our society and our work. So it's important that you should care about what it is and how it works, because there's probably going to come a day where you're going to need to interact with it. Okay, so the other thing to think about is, as a bit more of sort of a background, is the sort of future use of Bitcoin and the future use of sort of crypto assets. So there are a lot of people who think it's not going to last forever, and that Bitcoin itself is a bubble that's eventually going to disappear. To be perfectly honest, I'm certainly not the person to say whether that is true or not, but I certainly think that the blockchain technology is going to stay. So if that's the case, then that suggests that it's likely that Bitcoin is going to hang around as well. You also then have different types of tokens that provide the ability to use services in a different way. So we're going to explore those in more detail in a couple of slides, but to give you sort of just a little bit of a summary, a utility token sort of allows somebody to engage with a certain type of blockchain, like and then you've got payment tokens like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is limited and it arises out of the Bitcoin blockchain. So if you were ever to work with Bitcoin, you have to use the Bitcoin blockchain, just like if you're using Ethereum or Litecoin, you have to use the blockchain that's associated with that specific coin. Okay, investors look at what the blockchain is offering to them to then decide whether that is a coin or token that they want to invest in. And so this is where some degree of understanding of blockchain and understanding how that works is helpful when you're assessing whether a client should be holding on to a certain type of coin or not. So it will always be helpful for you to have experts involvement in giving you advice on whether those things are worthwhile or not. But sometimes if you are the one who is representing a client and deciding, you know, whether it's worth spending those thousands of pounds getting a private investigator to chase after certain coins or certain tokens, you need to have an understanding of whether that is something that's actually worth chasing or not. So there are certain coins and tokens that are just given to people for free. Those aren't necessarily something that you want to be chasing after, because it's unlikely that they're going to be worth a significant amount of money. Okay, the other thing to understand when it comes to blockchain technology is you can have a blockchain without tokens, but you cannot have tokens without a blockchain. So you could have a localized blockchain technology within your company that helps you process your transactions. You don't have to have tokens in order for that blockchain to work, but you cannot have tokens without a blockchain lying underneath them. So there will always be a blockchain underneath any token or any coin that you are working with as part of the financial disclosure. Okay. So the next slide is looking at the future value of Bitcoin. So as you'll appreciate from the illustration that we had earlier of how we've had that £1,000 and then up to 20 and then up to 47 and then where we are now, there is a huge uptick in the value, even though there's a big drop in between. So what we find is that it's essentially doing this and just going up through the market. And what that's called is it's called the halvening. So when people when people are mining for Bitcoin, which I'll go into in sort of a little bit more detail in a second, is they are receiving a reward for the amount of effort they are putting into that mining, the amount of power that they are giving to the blockchain to make it work. And over time, the amount of the reward that you get is halved and it reduces over time. So people that were mining 11 years ago were receiving a significantly higher amount of Bitcoin as a reward than they would be doing now. And that's why you have things in the news now of like massive warehouses in China and Russia that are mining. And that's because it's the only way you can really make a decent income from mining. You have to give it a significant amount of mining power, which is through computers. So what's happening now is they are opening huge warehouses in places that are very, very cold, because it makes it more efficient for them to then run that warehouse and to get those rewards. And that's also why there is a lot of negative press about the amount of energy that mining is using compared to other processes within the world. So people are criticizing the amount of electricity that mining is demanding and saying that that is having a negative effect on how we are using energy on the planet. The reality, from my opinion, is if you compare the amount of energy that people mining are using compared to other sort of more global industrial exercises, it's still not as bad and it's incomparable. But there we are. So as you can see here, what we're explaining is Bitcoin is limited in number, which is part of the reason why it has its value. So there are only 21 million Bitcoin that can ever exist. And that is part of how Satoshi Nakamoto created that structure. And every 210,000 blocks, so like those train carriages that are moving along the train, the mining of a new block, the reward is halved. And this is roughly every 4 years. So what you find is that as the reward halves, this makes the price go up because the amount that people are receiving goes down. So the rarity increases. Okay, we call this the stock to flow ratio. So what I've done is there's a graph coming up in the next slide. And what this does is it shows the heat map of Bitcoin's price compared to the number of days until the next halvening. So you can see, so let me just pull that up. So what we have here is we've got the heat map, which you can see. So at its very coldest, you've got 0 days until the next halvening, and that it's very hottest 1400 days until it. So with the amount of price, you can see over the years what has happened is, as we are getting closer to the point of halvening, the price has a massive spike up. And that pattern has happened every single time that we have had this halvening technology. We've had this happen. So what we're looking at now, so we're in 2022 now, and this graph was completed halfway through 2021. And inevitably, we're now seeing a reduction in the price of Bitcoin. We are seeing a decrease in the market. And so that matches what we would be expecting this heat map to show, because we are now getting towards the point of the halvening, but we're in that lull where it's not going to be happening for a good while. So there are people who are saying that the next spike is probably going to be end of 23, end of 2024, because that's when we're going to start getting closer to that part of the process. So this is the reason why people feel confident that Bitcoin is going to continue going up in value in these stepped ways, is because of this stock to flow model. It's because of how the market is engaging with that halvening process. So again, when you're thinking about advising your clients on whether they should be holding on to their Bitcoin or not, and when you're thinking about the timing of implementing financial disclosure or a financial order or anything like that, you almost want to have this in the back of your mind, because if you're advising a client at the beginning of 23 or at the beginning of 24, and you're seeing in the news that the halvening is about to happen, that is going to have an effect on the market. So you either want to get things done before the halvening happens so that you've got certainty of what everything is worth at that time, or the client may want to take a risk and wait until after the halvening, particularly if they're the ones seeking a claim on the asset, because it may be that the asset then suddenly goes up in value exponentially. And so then that's going to help your client when you're thinking tactically about how to work with these assets. Okay, so now we're going to talk about key phrases. So this is going to take a little while because we've got a few things to go through, but these are all the sorts of, this is all the sort of terminology that you need to start becoming comfortable with if you're going to be working with these assets. So firstly, we're going to talk about wallets. So a wallet is like a folder on your computer that holds documents, but what it's holding is your coins, okay? So you can have multiple wallets, and each wallet has to be connected with the blockchain of the coin that you are dealing with. So do you remember earlier we were talking about how you have to have a blockchain to have a token, but you don't have to have a token to have a blockchain. So if you've got certain tokens, they are specifically attached to the blockchain that they come from. So the Bitcoin blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain, etc. So you have to have a wallet that interacts with that specific blockchain. So if you're trying to send Bitcoin, you have to use a Bitcoin wallet so that it interacts with the Bitcoin blockchain. Okay, so you have lots of different types of wallets, and then there are different structures. So a cold wallet means that the wallet is offline. So a hot wallet means it's online. So if you have a wallet on your computer and your computer is connected to the internet, then the wallet is a hot wallet, because people could connect, they could hack into your computer through the internet and they can access that wallet, which means that there is a risk that someone could hack into that wallet and take what's in it. The reason that could happen is if your firewall isn't strong enough, or the passwords that you've attached to your wallet are not good enough, and people are able to break into it. People, unfortunately, are trying to hack into your system all the time. Right now, there are people trying to hack in through your network, and they are trying to connect to your computer. That's happening 24/7. And that's why we have firewalls and we have passwords and we have security, because we don't want people to get into our computers. So it's even more important when you have crypto on your computer to ensure that that's completely iron tight, because people will try to do that. So some people think it's safer to have a cold wallet, and most cold wallets, they almost look like a USB stick. And so you put it into your computer and you download the information onto that stick, and then you put that wherever you want to put it. So if you ever have a case where somebody says, oh, well, I have a cold wallet, so I can't access anything, you know that that is something that can be plugged into a computer and that information can be accessed. So it doesn't mean that it's completely off the grid. So the other thing is you can have a wallet on a trading platform. So Coinbase is one of the most popular trading platforms in the UK. There are also other platforms such as Binance, and there's a few others around. But Coinbase is good because they are AML compliant. So they have ID on all of the clients that they have on their systems, and they also comply with court orders. So last week, for example, I was involved in applying for an emergency freezing order against Coinbase because the opponent was basically spending all the money they had in their wallet. So the only way you would be able to control a wallet is if it is on a trading platform. So you can't get a freezing order for a cold wallet or for a hot wallet because it's not controlled by anyone. It's completely decentralized. That's the whole point of it. So you can't serve the order on anybody. There's no one that's going to enforce it. So if you're looking at a scenario where you need to try and protect the coins that are in a wallet, you need to put it somewhere where a third party has autonomy over controlling it, because then that's the person you can serve the order on. Okay, so with the wallets, there are ways for you to log into it. So you have your private key and you also have your public key. So your public key is like a bank account number. So that's the information that you would be making part of your disclosure, because that's the account, that's the number that everybody is able to know. And when you're sending Bitcoin to somebody over the blockchain, you are giving the blockchain their public key, and that's how they know where to send it to. So your private key is like your PIN number. So your private key is something that you would never disclose to anybody, and it is something that you would not expect somebody to provide as part of their financial disclosure. So you should never provide your client's private key as part of disclosure, and you should not ask for it either, because it's not something that would be expected to be provided. So those are sort of how the wallets work. The other thing actually is the paper wallet. So a paper wallet is sort of like a different form of cold wallet. So rather than having it on a USB stick, you would keep it offline on your computer, but you would have essentially a piece of paper with your private key written on it, and that piece of paper is kept somewhere safe. And then if you ever need to use the wallet, you have to get the code from that piece of paper in order for that wallet to work on your computer. It's not used necessarily that common, but if you're making an application for an access order, you know, if you're applying to access the property because somebody is not providing you with the disclosure that you require, one of the first things I would be doing is I would be finding a safe in the house if there is one. And if there's a piece of paper in that safe with a very, very long number written on it, that's your paper wallet. Okay, so that's something that you would need to be looking out for if that's something you're going to be looking at. My slides have got excited. So what I am going on to next is the blockchain. So with the blockchain, we've obviously talked quite a lot at this point about how the blockchain interacts with the token. We've talked about that analogy of it being like a train, and each block is like a carriage moving along the train. So mining is the way that train moves. So at its most sort of simple explanation, what you're doing with mining is you are using the power of your graphics card to solve very lengthy mathematical equations that unlocks the block. And that mining power that you are using to do that is what is enabling the blockchain to work. Now, try not to worry that that is something that is very difficult to get your head around, because the reality is you don't need to know how that technically works, just in the same way as you don't need to know how your mobile phone works. You don't need to know how you're able to pick up the internet in your house despite not being connected to any wires. It's just something that it's there, that's how it works. But don't panic if it's something that still sort of is a bit difficult to get your head around. It's more just to understand that if somebody is mining, they get a reward in exchange for giving that power to the blockchain to make it work. So when you're looking at how somebody has acquired an asset and they tell you that they were mining it, that helps you understand how they would have gotten hold of it. So it's not a scenario where you're buying it, you're not purchasing it, you are literally being given it. And if you are mining a lot through the course of a month, because it's not just Bitcoin you can mine any token that you wish to mine, but you get a reward in that token. So then it's up to you to decide if that token is worth your time and whether you're going to do anything with that token and whether it's worth anything. So what you tend to find is the more popular tokens have a more efficient blockchain because more people are applying their mining power to that blockchain. So you also have to think about with mining, I know none of you are going to really be giving any tax advice, but if they are mining on a regular basis and they are getting tokens on a regular basis, they have to look at income tax liabilities. So even though they are not selling it and they're not disposing of it, because they're earning it on a regular time frame, they will have to declare it from an income tax perspective. So you need to make sure that your client gets tax advice to ensure that this is something that they are doing effectively. Okay. The other side of it is trading. So trading is where people are putting their own money into purchasing crypto, and they are buying different types of token and they are trading them as and when they wish to. So we've already sort of had a brief discussion about the different trading platforms. I would advise you to familiarize yourself with the different trading platforms that there are, because when you're going through the financial disclosure, you want to be looking for the names of trading platforms within that financial disclosure if all they're doing is trading. Because with mining, you receive your reward into your wallet and then you transfer that reward, that token, from your wallet to the trading platform. So unless they give disclosure of the wallet, you've got no idea that they're doing that, because they're not using their bank accounts to do any of that. And if they're not drawing down any money from the trading platform into their bank account, there's literally no reference to it whatsoever. So mining means that there is a lot less of a paper trail. Whereas trading, you are inevitably going to have to put some money on the trading platform. So there is inevitably going to be a transaction within the bank statements showing that that money has been transferred to that trading platform. So then you've got a better idea of whether that's something that you need to be aware of. So that's sort of how trading works. I would say it's no different to trading stocks and shares, realistically. So then let's have a look at the coins, tokens, assets terminology that you should be familiarizing yourself with. So I've given you some examples on this slide of some of the more popular coins that people invest in. So Bitcoin and Ethereum are pretty much the two most popular now. Ethereum is on its own blockchain, as is Bitcoin. You also have other coins, for example, Litecoin. So Litecoin used to be the pence to Bitcoin's pound. So they would follow each other quite closely in their value. Litecoin was always worth less, but it's always had a pretty stable value. Ethereum has pretty much replaced Litecoin in the market now as far as popularity is concerned, but it's still a valid coin, it's still a valid investment. So you may find that people do have Litecoin alongside a few other bits and pieces. So Monero is one to be cautious of. So we talked earlier about how each token, each coin, each asset has a public ledger of a blockchain. So you can see where the coins have been and where they are going to go. With Monero, they have created it in such a way that the blockchain cannot be traceable. So even though you may know the wallet that Monero was sitting in, you cannot trace on that blockchain where that Monero has been or where it is going or where it has gone. So it's basically impossible to track it. And it means that people who want to be completely what's what I'm looking for, sort of completely secretive and completely hidden away, they had a tendency to lean towards Monero. However, because it's so difficult to trace and it's so difficult to track, what happened is the trading platforms stopped trading it. So because they couldn't get any assurity from an AML perspective on who was actually working with that Monero, they just stopped trading it. So Monero has lost its value significantly because nobody's buying it. So even though you might put your money into it, you then can't get rid of it. So even though it sounds like a great idea for somebody who wants to try and hide their assets, the reality is you're a bit stuck if that's the only thing you've put your money into, because there's not a lot you can do with it. So it is one of the more worrying coins from a sort of disclosure perspective, but it's becoming less and less common. And if anything, it's probably something that is very unlikely to be used for much longer. So the next phrase on that list is fiat. So it's not a car, it's actually the term that the crypto community uses for any other currency. So pounds, dollars, yen, all of those different types of currency. When you're transferring your crypto into a centralized currency, it's called, transferring it into fiat. So when you're looking through disclosure, or when somebody is writing to you with an information about their digital assets and they use the word fiat, they're talking about normal currency, normal finance that you and I would be familiar with on a day-to-day basis. The final thing, which is a new addition to the list, is NFTs. So non-fungible tokens. So there are people who are now calling them NFAs, non-fungible assets, but the concept behind them is that they are a one-off that is recorded on a blockchain, on a public blockchain, and it's yours. It's a digital asset that you own and that nobody else can own. So they are becoming very popular in the art community. Originally became sort of very much the flavor of the month sort of 18 months ago, with places like Sotheby's starting to trade in NFTs, because you have the proof that NFT alone belongs to you and that you've purchased it and that it's yours. And you have a type of wallet that you would have for your NFT, and it sits in that wallet, and it has a digital signature on it that it means it belongs to you. So the art community really likes the concept of an NFT because it allows them to monetize a physical piece of art into a digital asset that they can then sell on. There are also people in the art community that purely work from a digital perspective. So this is a way for them to sell a digital piece of artwork in a way that ensures that there is a record of who made it and who bought it, and ensuring that it can't be copied or that fraud can be committed. So they are losing their sort of market appeal slightly, because I think people got very excited about them last year. So you may have read in the news that one of the founders of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, his first tweet was sold as an NFT for over $1 million, which is crazy. It was then resold about a month ago for $2,000. So the hype has very much decreased when it's looking at what can we turn into an NFT, and how can we monetize this as a concept. But the concept of an NFT is not going to disappear. I think what will happen is it will calm down, and the value of them is not necessarily going to be as high as it has been to date. So you need to bear that in mind when you're looking at disclosure and somebody says to you, oh, well, I have an NFT. So, imagine a scenario where you have a spouse that says, oh, well, I bought it for $1 million, but it's worth absolutely nothing now. If you don't understand the market of NFTs, it's likely that you're going to approach that with a bit of skepticism and say, well, really, you paid that much for it, so it's probably going to have quite a high value. The reality is not necessarily. So what you don't want to do is to encourage your client down a path of litigation to fight and prove that that is worth more than the other spouse says it is, if actually the reality is it genuinely has lost its value that quickly. So you just need to bear that in mind, and keep an eye on that and how that's going to work. Okay, so what is a crypto asset? So we'll go through this and then we're going to have a little break, and then that will take us on to sort of the next part of the talk, which is looking at how to find crypto assets and how to work with disclosure, etc. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. If anything I've talked about up to now, if you have any questions on that, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can save them till later. But that's all of the sort of blockchain lesson that we're going to go through, and then we're going to focus more on the family law side of things. Okay, so what is a crypto asset? So you've got different types of tokens, and I've listed them all here. So your first one is payment tokens. So these are tokens that are used as a means of payment. So Bitcoin is accepted as a currency. There are countries that have it as their main currency, like El Salvador, and it is something that you can use to buy goods online or pay for services. So the difficulty with that is it's treated like an investment asset from a CGT perspective, but it's also treated like a currency. So it's a bit of a sort of one thing and another. Ethereum is also a payment token, as is Litecoin that we talked about earlier. And so there are lots of different tokens that can be used as currency if somebody is willing to accept it as currency. And one of the reasons why Bitcoin is so popular as a currency is because it has a public ledger. So they know that if they're accepting that Bitcoin as payment, that is not a fake Bitcoin. It is something that they can then use themselves moving forward. And it's for that reason that when HMRC set out their latest tax guidance back in 2018, 2019, there is corporation tax in there for people who are accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment. So HMRC are expecting it to be used as a payment token as well as an investment asset. So the next is looking at utility tokens. So utility tokens are a way to engage with a platform. So if you think about things like your Tesco Club Card points, that would be a utility token, because you are being given those points, which you can then use towards things that Tesco are offering you. Arguably, it could be a payment token, but you are putting it towards things that that Tesco would be offering you, as opposed to choosing what you want to use those tokens for. And also, you can't use Club Card points for anything but Tesco. So I think it is a utility token, technically. So initial coin offerings is a bit like NFTs in how much they affected the market. So initial coin offerings appeared sort of 2017, 2018, when everyone was getting very excited about the increase in value in Bitcoin. And it was seen as a way to monetize companies. So you already have what we call an IPO, an initial purchase offering now with normal companies, where people are given the opportunity to purchase shares in a company before the company is launched. So the idea behind it is that you buy the shares at a lower value, the company is launched, the shares go up in value, and you make money. So an initial coin offering, the way that they were marketing it was you could purchase your utility tokens for a company that had just launched, and that those tokens would go up in value as people wanted to buy them so that they could interact with that platform. So you had a lot of people saying that their platform was going to be amazing and it was going to offer services that nobody had ever seen. But in order to use it, you had to have your utility tokens. So all of these angel investors who invested at the very start were being sold this concept of, well, you want to buy all of these now because you'll be able to sell them to all the people that will want to use our service, and you'll be able to sell them for more money than you bought them from us for. So that's the idea of an ICO. However, the problem is a lot of people were lying. So a lot of those ICOs that were created never did anything. So they either went bust, they disappeared completely. There are still some ICOs now that say that they're in a place where they're about to pay out and they're about to launch the company. So ICOs really died a death towards the end of 2018 because so many of them were fraudulent. And so that led people to being very reluctant to invest in anything like that. And so people stopped doing it. And so people weren't able to make money out of an ICO. But for a good while, they were very much the flavor of the month. So the reason I'm telling you about ICOs is because when you are looking through your disclosure, you may have scenarios where people have invested in an ICO that has not yet released the investment. So they will say, well, this is what I have, but it's worth nothing because it's still locked up in the platform, in the company that I originally invested in. So you need to treat things like that like unvested stocks and shares. So things that people have like stock options that they aren't able to release and benefit from yet, if there is proof that those are inevitably going to be things that are released and will have a value, then you need to treat them as having a future value as opposed to having no value at all. So I had a case a couple of years ago now where I wasn't representing the client on the first instance, and the husband's solicitors managed to convince the court that because his interest in an ICO was locked into the ICO, then it meant that they were worth nothing. And of course, most judges, unfortunately, don't understand this world at all. So you really have to hold their hand when you're talking to them about it. So the judge agreed because my client wasn't being represented by somebody who understood what they were doing. And so we ended up having to appeal the decision, bearing in mind that the value of his investment was in the six figures. It was certainly relevant. And we ended up winning on appeal, and we ended up changing what the final order was actually going to be. So you've got to be aware of that pitfall of not allowing the other side to convince the court that it's worth nothing, but also being aware if you're the one that has the ICO, it could be worth something in the future. And so you just need to be wise to that. A good example of a utility token that exists at the moment and that is pretty active is Binance Coin. So Binance is a trading platform like Coinbase, and they created their own utility token, Binance Coin, with the idea that you would use that coin in order to interact with Binance as a trading platform. They gave a fair few people some free Binance Coin if they had an account with Binance, and you can sell it on or you can keep it with some people's idea that it's going to go up in value. Now, Binance as a company is a tricky one because they refuse to do AML requirements like Coinbase does. So they are not as compliant with our financial system as the system would like. And so what that means is that they are very limited in how they can engage with the market. So you will probably have cases where somebody has a Binance account, but if you're looking at things like working with freezing orders and approaching trading platforms to implement them, you are going to really struggle with somewhere like Binance because they just don't care. So if you serve a freezing order on them, they will just say that they're not in control of the wallet and there's nothing that they can do. So you'll have wasted a lot of money achieving very little. So you just need to be aware of that if you're thinking of making an application to that sort of trading platform. Okay, the last token is what we call a security token offering. So a security token is like a stock or a share. So what they're doing is they're taking a physical tradable asset, like a property, for example, and they are creating security tokens that are dictated by the value of the physical asset. So with a property, what people are doing is they are creating security tokens that are attached to the property with the idea that if you invest in that token, it will go up in value as the property goes up in value. So it's a very easy way for people to monetize a fixed asset without having to do things like get a mortgage or have equity release. They are getting value out of giving people an interest in that asset, even though they wouldn't be on the title of the property or what have you. So it's becoming quite popular with commercial property where people are building huge office blocks with the idea that they're going to be rented out. So if you have a security token investment in that commercial property, as it becomes a more popular property and rental income increases and the property value increases, the value of your security token increases. And then you decide whether you want to sell that on or whether you want to retain it because you think it's going to increase in value. We've sort of already covered non-fungible tokens, but they are a form of crypto asset. They can't be used to pay for anything, and then they are not something that gives you the ability to access a service. Arguably, they're a bit like a security token in that they're attached to an external physical asset, but you don't have to have a physical piece of artwork in order to have a digital artwork NFT. So NFTs can be independent from a physical asset. They don't have to be attached to a physical asset. So they are slightly different in that respect. Okay, so we're coming up to just after 1 o'clock now, and the rest of the slides are looking more at applying what we've just discussed over the last hour or so to how you would work that within your family practice. So I think now is a good time for us to take a quick break. So what I would suggest is we have a break now and come back at 10 past. So I'll give you a few minutes to go make a cup of tea and sort of, wake yourself up a bit and get ready for the next bit. And if anybody has any questions during the break, I'm still going to be here. So feel free to use the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask me a question, then that's absolutely fine. So we'll take a break now. We'll come back at 10 past, and then we'll move on to the next part of the seminar. Okay, so we are mostly back. We appear to have lost somebody, but hopefully they'll rejoin. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the family law side of things. So how to find crypto assets, the magic question. I would preface this with saying that if somebody wants to hide their assets, they will do that whether crypto exists or not. So whilst people tell you that they have bank accounts and provide you with disclosure, if they don't tell you about a bank account, you will not necessarily ever know that that account existed. So if you imagine a scenario where someone discloses, you know, 2 bank accounts, one with HSBC and one with NatWest, you're never going to know if there's another account with Lloyds unless you made a third-party disclosure order, but then you have to have some justification for making the same. So whilst there is a concern about how you would ever know that somebody had this as an asset if they didn't provide disclosure of it, I would argue that the concern is the same if they didn't disclose any other asset as part of disclosure. So that being said, here are the sorts of things that you should think about when you're trying to discover if somebody has crypto assets. So the first thing you want to think about is you should look for reference to a trading platform. So we talked earlier about people who will trade in crypto, but not necessarily mine it. So that means that there is going to be some transactional history of them putting money on a trading platform. Now, I've had cases where the problem we had was the other individual used a completely separate bank account for their trading platform transactions, and they didn't tell us about that bank account. So through the fact that we did disclosure applications to find the bank accounts, we then discovered they had a trading platform account, and then it went from there. But had we never discovered that bank account, we may never have discovered that they had crypto to begin with. So you need to have a look in the bank statements to see if there are any references to that trading platform. You're then also thinking about how they give you the financial disclosure for that trading platform. So you don't get annual statements, you don't get bank statements, you don't get anything like that. What you have is you have a trading history that you can download from your trading account, and that shows all of the movements in and out of that trading account throughout the history of the account, or you can give it a specified date period. It's not enough for you to have a screenshot of what is currently in your wallet. So what you sometimes get is someone giving you a screenshot of their phone, which just says Bitcoin 0.5, Ethereum 20, and I don't know, Litecoin 7, with a value of what that's worth currently at the point of that screenshot, and then a summary of the total value of what's in their wallet at the top of that screenshot. Now, that's fine, except that only shows you what they have in that moment. So you have no idea if they just sold a bunch of Bitcoin before they took that screenshot, if they had a load of fiat cash in their wallet online, which they've just withdrawn. You've got absolutely no idea. So that is no different to those account summaries that you can get for your bank accounts that says, well, you've got 3 accounts and this is the balance in each of them. Well, that's great. That means I know how much you now have, but I don't know what you've been doing with your money. And so that's why you need to ask for the trading history of the transaction history of that trading account. Don't accept a simple screenshot showing a summary of what they actually have in that account. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind. You're then, oh, hang on a second. I think, let me just admit Nick. So you're then looking at the point that we talked about earlier, which is when you're making applications for disclosure orders or search and access orders, where you are quite literally accessing a property and searching it for things that you're trying to find to prove that someone's not given their proper disclosure. So this is what we talked about earlier with finding the safe and seeing if they have a paper wallet, and having a think about looking for something like that when you're making that application to the court. With freezing orders, we've already talked sort of briefly about why they are tricky. So you can apply to freeze somebody's trading account on a trading platform, and that is basically the only way you can try and freeze somebody's wallet to stop them from sort of getting rid of those assets. So you need to be careful about how you make that application. You need to word your order carefully to ensure that there is clarity on what you are actually asking that trading platform to do. And you want to avoid things where I've seen it happen, where people will actually accidentally freeze the entire bank account of the company because that is how they've worded the application. So there needs to be caution, because if you do it wrong, you could be on the receiving end of cost order. So you need to make sure that what you're asking for and what you're applying for is right, because the UK court is very sympathetic to crypto fraud. So allegations of fraud, allegations of theft, allegations of lack of disclosure, all in connection with crypto. You have a tendency for the courts to give you what you're asking for because they don't really understand what you're asking for. So they err on the side of on the side of doubt, and they go with side of caution, and they err and they give you what you're asking for. So you just need to make sure that that is accurate, because you don't want to create a headache for yourself. Okay. So the next slide is if it's going to load. Let me just check. Yeah. So you're then looking at, so Nick asked the question during the break of, how do you sort of find assets if they haven't told you that they've got them? And these are the sorts of ways that you can be a little bit of a detective to try and see if that person has a connection with the crypto community, to give you an idea of whether that's something that you need to be aware of. So obviously you've got things like the search and access orders already, which people use generally for other areas, but you also need to be a bit more creative. So have a look on social media. We've all looked at clients on Facebook to see if they've accidentally posted their girlfriend on there so we can prove adultery or what have you. But you now also need to think about using it for things like crypto. So do they have a Twitter account? Are they following crypto accounts on Twitter? Are they taking an interest in that community? Did they used to follow those accounts? If you go through their Twitter history and see if they've suddenly unfollowed all of them because they're going through a divorce, so they're trying to cover their tracks. Having a look at things like Facebook, are they engaging with those sorts of conversations? Have they got a public profile so that you're actually able to look at all the things they've been talking about since they started their Facebook account? All of those sorts of things. So you are looking at whether they have any connection to those sorts of companies. Have they invested in ICOs? Have they invested in, so an IEO is an initial exchange offering. So that's Binance Coin was an IEO. So you're looking at whether they have discussed those investments in the past. They're now telling you that those investments don't exist anymore. Well, is that really the case? Do you need to investigate the history of that ICO and what's happened to it so that you can get a better understanding of whether they have an investment in that company or not? One example of trying to be a bit creative is I had a case sort of 3 or 4 years ago where they gave us disclosure on, it was one of those cases where they just bombarded us with disclosure in hopes that it hid things that we wouldn't find because we just had so much to look through. And so what happened in that one is they had a company. So it worked in a form of trading. So I looked at that company's website and looked through all of it to see if there was anything else that I could find. And a very, very small link in the bottom corner referred to a token offering website. So I clicked on that, and that opened up a whole new site of an ICO that the company had created. So they had created a token connected with the service that they were offering, and they were selling it, and they were setting out when they were going to launch their ICO. So none of that had been disclosed as part of their financial disclosure, but because we worked through the disclosure they'd given us, we were able to find something that they'd already put online. And then once I put the chap's name into Google with the ICO, all of the crypto talks that he'd been given across the world suddenly came up. So you're then asking bigger questions about what involvement he has with that community, what's going on with the ICO, and you're having a very different conversation at that point about how all of that is going to work. Now, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a scenario like that because of the history of ICOs, like we went through before the break. It's not that common for companies to create ICOs anymore, but it's an example of how you can use the disclosure that they have given you to try and find further information about them through the internet. And sometimes Google can be your friend. The last thing to think about is where someone has told you that they have a wallet, they've given you the public key, however, they've told you that they can't access it, or they've told you that the wallet has been hacked and so everything's left that wallet and there's nothing that they can do about it. So because the blockchains are all on public ledgers, they're all public blockchains, that means you can trace the movement of the tokens. So there are companies out there. So if you really wanted to, you could download the public Bitcoin blockchain right now. If you Google the Bitcoin blockchain, you can go on to the Bitcoin blockchain website and you can download the entire ledger from the point that it was created in 2008. I wouldn't advise it because it's an absolutely massive file, but it illustrates how it's there if you want to look for it. So if you genuinely had the time, you could search the movement of coins from a wallet yourself. Now, that is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's going to be there, but it's going to be very difficult. So there are companies out there that have software that interacts with the public ledger to find the information that they're looking for, to then show you where those coins have gone and what wallets they are now sitting in. So you can show the movement of tokens from the wallet that's being controlled by the other spouse and show that they have moved somewhere else and identify where they have gone. The difficult part is proving that they have control over that wallet and also proving who owns that wallet to begin with. So one of the things you can do is you can try and use technology to prove that that wallet belongs to somebody. And there are companies out there that can help you look at things like that. So it tends to be more people who are investigating fraud. I'm just going to turn my light on. Investigating fraud, they can then track down who has control over that wallet through using sort of investigative technology and software. It's very much out of our respective wheelhouses, but there are people out there who can do that. And what they can show is they can show a literal movement of all the coins. So that is very helpful if somebody is telling you that they have been hacked and that they've lost everything, then you can say, well, we found it and this is where it's sitting. So now let's take the next step. You also can have situations where people say that they can't access their wallet anymore because they've forgotten the private key, so it's locked forever and they're never going to be able to get access to it again. You also have people who say that they've just simply lost it and they've got no idea. So one of the things that you can think about if someone says that they've lost the private key to the wallet is, firstly, there are companies out there that specialize in helping people to hack open their wallets again. So they do things like they try and talk you through what you might have been thinking of when you created the passcode or the passphrase for that wallet and the sorts of terminology that you might have been thinking of at the time. They will also help to quite literally force it open if they can. So I frequently like to call people's bluff and say, well, okay, you say it's locked forever. You want it open just as much as we do. So let's work with a company to get this open and let's get it unlocked. And sometimes that results in them suddenly remembering what the key was and everything gets unlocked. And other times they say, yeah, sure, fine, let's see what we can do. You know, there's a case of mine from last year where they had 100 Ethereum locked in a wallet. So the value of Ethereum right now is just over £1,000 a coin. It was worth significantly more than that last year. So it's, you know, you're talking about millions of pounds worth of assets that you're trying to unlock. So it's quite easy to say to someone, well, surely it's in your interest to unlock it as well, because it's going to benefit you as well. So don't take it at face value, but also if a company helps you try to unlock that wallet, and they can't do anything with it, then it genuinely could be something that is unlocked forever, is locked forever, sorry. But what you can do is, because you will know the public key of that wallet, even if it's locked, you can watch it. So you can put the address, you can put that public key into Google, and it will show you the transactional history of that wallet for a certain period of time, and it will show you the balance of what is in that wallet. So if anything moves out of it, bearing in mind you have someone telling you that it's locked and they can't do anything with it, you know that they have access to that wallet, and then that's when you kick into action. So you can follow it and you can work with it. And that's so those are the sorts of ways that you can try to find crypto assets if they haven't provided you with any disclosure of the same. So where you have a suspicion that somebody has that interest, these are the sorts of ways that you can think about working creatively to discover whether they have those assets or not. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is how to disclose crypto assets. So this is where you have a scenario where you're acting for the person who has the assets. So you have to be aware of how you're working with these assets, because ultimately you're protecting them for your client. So what you don't want to do is to be flippant about them, thinking that it's just no different to a car being listed on the Form E. These can have a significant material effect on settlement. So it's really important that you work with them accurately. So the first thing to think about is providing a breakdown of the transactions from a client's wallet. So where you are disclosing the wallet history for a client, they may say to you, well, this is how much I've got in my wallet, and that's all the information you need to know. That's not enough. You need to have the trading history of the wallet in exactly the same way you would have the trading history from a trading platform, because you are essentially proving that is the movement of everything that's happened in that wallet, and that's how they've acquired what is currently sitting in that wallet. You can also give a list of the public keys, which is to some degree no different to a bank account. Now, some clients are resistant to give the public key because it means that the other party can watch that wallet forever. However, it can be an effective way to illustrate to the other side that you are being open and honest with your financial disclosure, because it won't be unusual for you to be met with a degree of concern from the other side because you're working with crypto. There is a school of thought that crypto automatically correlates with fraud and trying to hide assets. So you will be met with distrust, whether it's justified or not, unfortunately. And so that's just something that you have to bear in mind. So if the client really doesn't want to give their public key, you need to explain to the other side that the reason why they don't want to give it is because they don't want the wallet to be tracked for eternity. So, for example, I represented a third party in proceedings. And so what happened there was the couple had invested into crypto via the third party. And then when they got divorced, by that point, the third party had effectively lost everything. He wasn't particularly good at what he did, but he did it nonetheless. So Party one says, well, that's fair enough. You've lost everything. I accept that. Party two says, no, I don't believe that. I think you've actually got assets that you're holding on for party one. So I got instructed to represent the third party. And part of that was illustrating to everybody involved in the case where those investments had gone and what had happened with those tokens. And my client really didn't want to give the public keys to his wallets because he was not a party to these proceedings. He's not connected to either of these individuals, and he doesn't want them watching his wallets for the rest of eternity. So that's an understandable resistance to provide that information. And we provided more than sufficient information elsewhere to illustrate what had actually happened within those wallets. So what we did was we got the transactional history and we just redacted the public key, basically, to give him that privacy. The third point, and very, very, very important point, is do not disclose the private key, because that gives the other person control over the wallet. So you categorically do not want to give that information. And if a court tells you you should give that information, you need to explain why that is not appropriate and that is not something that should be provided. More often than not, your client is going to understand that that is not something that should be disclosed, but you just need to be cautious in case you have somebody that's just kind of, you know, wandering along and just going with the flow, and they give you all the information assuming you know to not give out the public and the private key, and before you know it, you've done it and it's too late. So you have to make sure that you don't do that. It's really, really important. Okay, the next point is obviously breakdown of transactions from trading platforms. So we've talked at the previous slide about the different sorts of trading platforms that you can think about. So when your client inevitably sends you a screenshot from their phone showing the least amount of information possible, you know that there is a way for them to download their trading history for their account. And that is the disclosure that you need to provide to the other side, because that is the way that you can illustrate not only what they currently have, but how they have got to the point where that is what they do have. So you are proving that they haven't just suddenly dissipated half of their wallet because they've been going through this disclosure exercise. So it helps them and it helps the other side. You also need to think about tax. So I know that all of us inevitably will send clients off to an accountant to get tax advice on how they're going to be working with assets, but we all still need to have a certain awareness of how our advice is going to be affecting people from a tax perspective. So when it comes to crypto, you have different triggers for tax. So a lot of people think that the only time you are triggering a gain you're triggering a gain for CGT, you're creating a disposal, is if you transfer your coins into fiat, into currency. That's not true. If you trade one coin for another, that trade is a disposal. And so that trade triggers CGT. So if you have a client that provides you with a trading history that shows that they have been trading tokens back and forth for the last 2 or 3 years, they need to lodge a tax return. So they need to declare those transactions so that they can then pay any tax that they need to. And that's also important if you're thinking about transferring some of those tokens to the other spouse, because they're still going to be subject to the CGT that the previous spouse should have paid. So you need to do your due diligence on whether that is a risk that the client is going to need to be aware of. And irrespective of whether they've done a tax return prior to instructing you or not, them transferring the tokens to the other party is going to be a disposal. So that needs to be taken into account as well. We also touched briefly earlier on mining. So mining is a form of income. So mining triggers income tax. So if your client is telling you that they are mining, again, they need to be told to complete a tax return because they have to declare that income. There are online tax companies that specialize in crypto tax. So Accounting is one example of a company that does it, and they have software that essentially pulls your trading history from things like Coinbase and any other mining platforms that you're using, and it is able through the algorithms to calculate what your tax liability will be. HMRC has a crypto tax department now, and this year and last year anyone who had a Coinbase account was written to by HMRC and told that they need to make a voluntary disclosure. So if your client has been contacted by HMRC, they really need to do something about that sooner rather than later, because otherwise they are going to be at risk of penalties on top of a likely tax bill. So that's something that you just need to be conscious of when you're advising them on what we need to do with those assets. The last thing is something that I get asked about a lot, which is how do you value an asset that fluctuates so wildly throughout proceedings? So there is no definitive answer of how you value these assets. There is no case law, there is no tested method. So my approach is to work with the assets in exactly the same way that I would be working with stocks or shares. So they will change their value. You will need to do updating disclosure, and you will need to address the value as part of that disclosure as you go through proceedings. If the crypto assets you're working with significantly plummet in value, say prior to a final hearing, then you just tell everybody that that's what's happened. In much the same way of if you had shares invested in a company that suddenly went bust and your share value went plummeted to zero, you're going to be telling the court that that's what's happened. So you just need to be on top of the values a little bit more than you would be with something like shares, because obviously the market is going to change substantially quickly compared to others. And it's for that reason that sometimes clients tend to keep their crypto rather than splitting it up, because they are either concerned at how it's been valued as part of the split, or some spouses who've never been that bothered about it in the first place just don't want anything to do with it and they don't want to know about it. So those are the sort of factors that you need to think about when you're disclosing your crypto assets. So just to summarize, you need to look at a breakdown of transactions from the client's wallets. You need to provide a list of public keys, so long as your client understands and consents to that information being provided. A breakdown of transactions from trading platforms, and also bearing in mind any tax liability that might arise out of a division of those assets, because you'll need to put that as a liability within your Form E. Okay, and then just to quickly summarize on the previous one about how to try and find assets if they haven't been disclosed already, you're looking through the bank statements to see if there are any entries to any trading platforms or anything that refers to any sort of crypto interest. Also, particularly, if they have an extremely high electricity bill, that means they might be mining, because that's using up electricity in the house. So little things like that to make you think about whether there might be something else there. And also thinking about whether they have any engagement from a social media perspective, or whether they have any historical involvement with, creative investments and being an entrepreneur and things like that. That might mean that they have a certain interest in that. Okay, so now we are moving into the last bit, which is questions. So now is sort of the Q&A for us to have any questions and for us to talk about anything that hasn't made sense or anything that I haven't covered. So there's a couple of questions in the chat, which I'm going to go through now. And if anybody wants to put in any other questions, or if anybody wants to come off mute and ask me a question, you're more than welcome to do so. So the first question is just another one from Nick, is how do you pay for a Bitcoin? Where does the money go to? So if you want to buy Bitcoin, then the normal way is to go to a trading platform. So you would go to Coinbase, you would create an account, you would upload money from your bank to the trading platform, and then that would allow you to purchase Bitcoin. The only other scenario is you could buy it from an individual, but that would involve you doing a bank transfer to that individual and giving them what your public key of your wallet is, and then they would transfer Bitcoin to you from their wallet to yours. So there is always a way for you to purchase it. You can purchase it using other tokens. So theoretically, what you could do is you could choose to buy a Bitcoin for the equivalent value of Ethereum. And if you find an individual that you want to do that with, you could send Ethereum from your Ethereum wallet to them, and then they would send a Bitcoin from their Bitcoin wallet to you. Now, from my perspective, I would say that that's very risky to purchase crypto from somebody independently. But if you're doing it through using crypto to make the purchase, then it's untraceable if you don't disclose those wallets, because it's not touching your bank accounts. With something like Coinbase, you can upload things like Ethereum or Bitcoin onto your trading platform wallet, and you can use that as a form of currency to trade and purchase different crypto within the trading platform. Or if you literally don't have any tokens and you're having to use your own money, you'd be uploading money to that trading platform. And as far as where the money goes, it goes into the pocket of the person who you're buying the tokens from, or it goes to Coinbase, depending on how that's going to work. They also have things like if you're doing trading on the trading platform, they have trading fees. So you pay Coinbase a slice of the trade that you're making, and that's really how they make their money day to day. Okay, so the next question is from Amber. What is the difference between wallet transactions and trading platform transactions? Is it that people can do multiple transactions without there being a record in their wallet, and therefore you need both transaction records? So a trading platform wallet can have multiple different types of coin in it. So you can have Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, just normal currency, and all of that is connected to your trading platform wallet. So it's a much easier way if you're planning to make multiple transactions with lots of different tokens and coins. It's easier for you to do that on a trading platform because you can do all of it in one place. Whereas if you have just a wallet that's like on your computer, then that is essentially just a storage of your wealth that's not connected to anything. So what you're holding on the trading, what you have on the trading platform is a form of wallet, but it is a wallet that the trading platform has created. So when, for example, you're applying for a freezing order, you're telling the trading platform to freeze that person's wallet on the trading platform. So the transactions themselves aren't necessarily any different. It's just how you interact with them that is different. And if you, so if you're transferring Bitcoin to Coinbase, you would have a record on your Bitcoin wallet that you've made that transfer to a different wallet, which is your Coinbase wallet. Your Coinbase wallet has a public key. And then if you decide to withdraw that Bitcoin from that trading platform wallet, you draw it down into your Bitcoin wallet, again, using the public key for the Bitcoin wallet. And you say to Coinbase, I want to send it from here to there. And that's how that would work. Okay, hopefully that's helped explain that question. The next question is from Amber again. Do you raise cryptocurrencies as a standard question in your questionnaire? As I don't think the Form E specifically refers to disclosing cryptocurrency accounts. So unsurprisingly, no, the Form E does not refer to cryptocurrency in any way, shape or form. If I was providing disclosure of wallets, I would be including it in that section 2.4, which is where you're disclosing things like ISAs and shares, etc. Because what you can do there is you can list the wallet and you can say the asset is Bitcoin. You then say how many Bitcoin you have, what value it is, and then it gives you that quantification, that calculation at the end of how much that is then therefore worth as part of the disclosure. So that's where I'd put it, but it is personal preference. So wherever you want to put it, where you think that that's going to be the most effective way to explain what you're actually disclosing, then I think it's completely up to you. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next sort of 2 to 3 years, they might make reference to it in one of the sections, which is just sort of a catch-all for anything. So you know how you have the section in your Form E, which is any other assets, which is basically whatever the hell you've got that we haven't talked about yet, put it here. You could always put it there instead, and they may even refer to cryptocurrencies in that section at some point in the future. Personally, I doubt that they will update the Form E with it. I think that will happen when we have the next spike. So when it becomes worth a lot more money again in the future, I think we will start to see some interest in that and that coming up again.
Thank you. I think I probably am not explaining myself as well. That's really helpful. But I think as well on but say it's our clients, would we have to set, when we're sending them the Form E, say to them, make sure you include any crypto assets
Oh, yeah.
you have. And then if we're reviewing for me from the other side, or the spouse's solicitors, would we ask the question, has this been missed off as standard? Is it common enough to warrant that?
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioned questionnaire in your question. I misread it, apologies. I think it's tricky because courts don't like a fishing expedition. So they don't like those questions which are, please provide disclosure of anything that you haven't disclosed, you know, because it's so open-ended and it's so exploratory just for exploring's purpose. So I think if there wasn't any, I wouldn't include a question as standard for every single questionnaire that I ever do. Just in as much as I wouldn't include a question of, do you have any foreign property assets in every single questionnaire I would do. You know, there's a degree of proportionality when you're looking at what you're putting in your questionnaire. So I frequently have it in mind, but that's probably because I have more clients with it than other people may have. I would suggest that you include a question about cryptocurrency if your client or you have a concern that that is an asset they have which they haven't disclosed. I think if you put it in as a generic question without any justification for why you're including it, I think you're likely to have a judge kick it out at the first appointment. Or you may get, you know, there are some great judges that sort of say, you know, well, do you have an answer? Yes, I do. What is it? No. Fine. Well, then we'll keep the question and you can just say no when you answer the questionnaire. You know, so I think it depends on the attitude of the judge you would have on the day. But I would be reluctant to include it. The other thing you've got to think about with questionnaires is sometimes it's what you don't put in that helps you. So if you discover that somebody has, you know, 5 or 6 companies that they've not told you about, when you're doing your questionnaire, don't put all 6 in, put 3 in and say, we've discovered these 3 companies. Can you give us information about these and any other companies you've not disclosed? And then when they don't disclose the other 3 you've already found, then it's nice and easy to whack in your schedule of deficiencies and potentially seek costs, because you're proving that that person is still actively trying to withhold that information. So if you find that they have cryptocurrency assets, you can be a bit creative in how you ask those questions within a questionnaire without necessarily giving them the heads up that you know that they have that as an asset. So, you know, you could ask, as you say, a general open question about whether they have any currency, any cryptocurrency, any crypto investments, knowing that you've already found something. So you're waiting for them to give you that disclosure, or to not, as it were, to then prove that they are actively trying to mislead the court. So I think I would include it if I had an inkling that that person had an interest in crypto, but I wouldn't include it as a standard question in any questionnaire. Okay, so we've probably got just shy of 10 minutes left of our session. So now is the opportunity to ask me anything else that you'd like to ask me before we wrap up today. As I said earlier, you'll all be getting a copy of this slide deck after today's talk. And obviously it's being recorded, so the recording will be available for people to have a look at. If you've found this talk useful, then I would recommend having a look on MBL, because I do a second talk which is a bit more in-depth to this one, where we look at case studies and how to apply the knowledge to different scenarios. So if it's something that you'd like to sort of further your knowledge on, then have a look at that. I think the next live one I'm doing is in September, but there's also a recording on there. The only thing I would say about the recordings sometimes is this market changes very quickly. So my talks, when I do them live, are also looking at what's happening in the market in that moment. So whilst the recording is there for you guys to watch, sometimes watching it live can actually be really helpful for you. And if anybody had any issues with that video that we played at the beginning, then just let myself or Helen know, and we can easily send you the link to the video, and it shouldn't be a problem for either of us to do that. Okay. You're welcome, Jackie. Thank you too. Thank you for coming. So I think then what we'll probably do is we'll probably wrap up now, if nobody has any other questions. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that's come along today. I hope that you found it useful, and that it's sort of helped you feel less terrified of this area. If any of you have cases where you need to bring somebody on board to help you with what you're looking at, I do sort of act as a consultant to help other law firms with their crypto cases. So I've advised London firms and counsel on how to draft orders and how to look at applications and how to look at disclosure. So if any of you are interested in looking at bringing me on board as a consultant for any case that you might have, then just drop me a line. My email address is on the final slide, and we can see whether we can help you, whether we can look at any of that for you. So I think we're going to say goodbye now, and I hope that you all have a very nice afternoon, and thanks for coming.